Thank you very much, Gavin, and I appreciate your attention this afternoon. My objective in the next 15 minutes or so are just to make a few comments about how we at GSK focus on innovation. Not so much to teach, but really to share some of the things we're trying to struggle with. This is not an easy question, and it's not something that I think anybody has the magic solution for. At GSK, I think there are probably three areas that we want to address in terms of innovating. One is our business model, the way of working. The second, of course, is the classic area of innovation of drug discovery. How do we really succeed in changing the historic trends of drug discovery? And the third is innovating the way in which we work with customers and other stakeholders. So for us, over the last year or so, certainly since I took over as CEO, change is very much the order of the day. Change in the way we see our business evolving, change in the way we run research, and change in the way we want to engage with our customers. If I just talk a little bit about each of those areas, changing the way we run our business, it's important that we're honest about what's broken about the business model in the pharmaceutical industry and in the way in which the industry has found it more and more difficult over the last decade to live up to expectations. It's also important to recognize the challenges that we have to ensure that we're seen as a valued rather than a loathed partner in society in terms of what we can deliver. That leads us to be thoughtful, challenging, and I hope innovative around the way in which the company behaves, around the values the company holds, around some of the decisions we take in terms of opening up access, for example, changing pricing strategies, for example, our stance towards the least developed countries in the world, for example, all of which have led us over the last year or so to, for example, open up our intellectual property in the LDCs to ensure that there is greater research undertaken on neglected diseases. It's led us to commit to reduce our prices in the least developed countries of the world by up to 75%. Those sorts of changes, those innovations, wouldn't have happened without creating a culture of empowerment and a culture where people throughout the company are free to make suggestions, criticize what's going on without feeling concerned about their future careers. It's important, if you want to foster a culture of innovation on business, of behavior, to have that level of openness. The second major area, and the classic area, of course, is how do we find more great drugs? Because ultimately we can manage the business model however we want, but if we fail to innovate and deliver new medicines of value, new vaccines that make a difference, then really the fundamentals of the company start to erode very quickly. Which is why the focus is always on how can we improve our research organization. And I want to just talk a little bit about some of the changes we've begun to make there as well. At its heart, we've really thrown into reverse much of the trend of research organization that had developed over the last 15 years. Over that period, when the industry was remarkably successful, commercially in particular, the industry also, I believe, took a wrong turning. It decided that drug discovery was an industrial process. It was a process where it was all about scale. It was all about creating great centers of excellence in very narrow disciplines. And it was about making sure you had a process map, and as long as you shared your process map with some smart people, those smart people would be capable of discovering a drug. I think the evidence over the last 10 or 15 years is that that approach has not yielded very much. The driven attempt by the industry to grab individual pieces of technology to transform drug discovery, the decoding of the human genome, combinatorial chemistry, proteomics, all of these different pieces of science, all were supposed to transform productivity, and yet none of them did. It turns out, in my view, that research is much more of an art than a science. It's much more personal than industrial. And those technologies are simply tools of the trade rather than answers to the question. And at GSK, what we've been doing over the last year and a half is really changing the way we structure research, very much to address those observations. So, for example, now at GSK, our discovery organizations have been broken down into discovery units no bigger than 50 people. We don't believe that you can create a really truly entrepreneurial environment with organisations of hundreds or thousands of people. We've made those organisations small so that they're personal, so that they're individualised and individuals' voices can be heard. What we've also done in those organisations is forced co-location of skill sets. We've broken down the silos, so for example now the chemist and the biologist will be co-located in parallel labs on the same site, rather than having an organisation where the chemists are in Philadelphia and the biologists are in Stevenage. Everybody who's needed on the team are in the labs. Whether it's one lab, two labs or three labs, there'll be a chemistry lab, a biology lab next door to each other. That allows much greater sense of the unexpected, because actually drug discoveries don't come according to a meeting schedule. They come because a smart person bumps into another smart person, has a conversation, and something new emerges from that conversation. So that kind of change is now embedded across our business. The third area is we've changed the way in which we release our researchers. And as somebody who cares about financial return, this is one of those difficult decisions. How do you create freedom in research, which is by definition an expensive business, and at the same time have some sense of discipline? And the way we've addressed that is to construct a series of hurdles. So our hurdles are very difficult to jump. If you want to initiate a drug discovery process within GSK on a target, you have to go to a drug investment board at GSK, which will be staffed by the most senior management of GSK and by external observers. For example, venture capital funders, external scientists, to ensure that we have the highest level of rigor and we don't simply choose our favorite children. We want to have a mechanism where we choose the very best science and the very best team. So the team has to jump that hurdle to qualify for funding. Once they've jumped that hurdle, then we leave them alone. Then they have 3 years to prosecute their plan. They don't have to come back every quarter or every year to re-justify. They're exempted from the budget process and they have 3 years to get on with it. So the way we structure now is to have a system where there is great discipline at 3 or 4 points in the process, but between the hurdles there is much greater freedom and empowerment for individuals to get on and do their job, so that they can focus on being creative, on trying to solve the riddles, and not have to worry about creating the next PowerPoint slide to ensure that their budget is sustained for a further period. The final part of what's changed is a massive opening and externalisation of our drug discovery organisation. So today, we have around 35 drug discovery teams inside GSK, ranged across the world in the way I've just described them. But we also have 40 biotechnology companies, mostly I have to say in the US, which are companies partnered with GSK where we have options over the drug development, drug discovery output of those companies. They represent external versions of the internal organisation that I've just described. Around those 75 or 80 drug discovery engines, we have a series of academic collaborations where we've begun to implant GSK scientists into the highest standard academic institutions, notably Harvard in the US for stem cell research, and notably Cambridge here in the UK around neuroscience. The intention across all of this is to diversify the source of discovery and to break down the barriers in terms of where information can be shared and opened up.